No, no, this isn't right. What's wrong? I told her I would be home. I told her. Please just let me in. We need to talk. There's nothing left to say. You can't stay here. But these are our memories. Don't you care? You made your choices. I made mine. Open this door. Get away. I am your mother. I can't believe I didn't see it before. Are you sure this is the right place? Yes, this is it. Then go in.
The key slid into my front door, but it would not turn. Behind the glass, my daughter Rachel watched me struggle beside the boxes she had packed with my clothes, photographs, and 68 years of memories. "We changed every lock, Mom," she said. "You don't live here anymore." My knees nearly gave way. This was my house, the home where I had raised her, buried my husband's ashes, and planned to grow old. But Rachel had forgotten something. At the end of the back alley stood a faded wooden door leading to one room she could never legally enter, because that room had never belonged to the house she thought she had stolen. Before I tell you what happened next, please like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, could you ever forgive your own child for doing this? Also let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love knowing who is sharing this moment with me. 18 months before my daughter locked me out of my own home, I still believed that opening my door to family was the safest thing a mother could do. My husband Samuel had been gone for only 4 months when Rachel called me on a rainy Tuesday evening. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "Mom, Grant's company lost another contract," she said. "Our landlord raised the rent and we're falling behind. We only need somewhere to stay for a little while." I stood in the kitchen staring at Samuel's coffee mug beside the sink. I had not moved it since the morning he died. Some days leaving it there made me feel foolish. Other days, it was the only reason the kitchen did not feel completely empty. "How long is a little while?" I asked. 3 months, maybe 4. Then I heard my grandson Noah in the background asking whether they would have to change schools. That question decided everything. 2 weeks later, Rachel Grant and 16-year-old Noah arrived at my brick house in Richmond with a rented truck, 3 mattresses, and enough boxes to suggest they had no intention of leaving soon. Still, I welcomed them. Rachel wrapped her arms around me in the front hallway and held on tightly. "You saved us," she whispered. At first, having them there felt like a blessing. Rachel cooked dinner most evenings. She drove me to church when I did not feel steady enough to drive myself. She sat with me at the kitchen table while I sorted Samuel's medical bills and insurance papers. Noah carried groceries, raked leaves, and sometimes sat in the garden room while I told him stories about his grandfather. Grant repaired a loose porch railing and replaced a broken gutter without charging me. He called me Miss Alice in that respectful Southern way he used when he wanted to charm someone. For a few weeks, the house felt alive again. Then the changes began. They were small enough that I felt petty for noticing. Rachel moved Samuel's recliner out of the living room because she said the fabric smelled old. She replaced it with a gray sectional that Grant had found at a warehouse sale. When I asked where the recliner had gone, she pointed toward the garage. "You weren't using it, Mom. I sat in it every evening." She paused, then gave me a patient smile. "You sat beside it. There's a difference." That sentence stayed with me. A few days later, I found 3 boxes of Samuel's clothes near the back door. Rachel had labeled them donation. "I was going to sort those," I said. "You've been saying that for months. I wasn't ready." She sighed as though my grief were another household chore she had been forced to complete. "I'm trying to help you move forward." I took the boxes back upstairs. Rachel did not argue, but that night I heard her telling Grant that I was holding on to everything. After that, she began changing things without asking. She replaced my yellow kitchen curtains with white blinds. She moved my dishes into higher cabinets because she wanted the lower shelves for Noah's snacks. She cleared the family photographs from the hallway and created what she called a cleaner, more modern look. The house slowly stopped looking like mine. One afternoon, I came home from the grocery store and found Grant measuring the dining room wall. "What are you doing?" I asked. He rolled up the tape measure. "Just checking the layout." "For what?" He glanced toward Rachel before answering. "This place has good bones. With the right updates, it could be worth a lot more." "I'm not selling." "Of course not," he said quickly. I'm just thinking long term. Grant talked about the future often. At dinner, he asked whether the mortgage had been paid off. While fixing the porch railing, he asked how property taxes were handled after Samuel's death. Once, when he thought I was asleep in the den, I heard him ask Rachel whether my will had been updated. Rachel lowered her voice. She doesn't like discussing that. She needs to, Grant replied. People her age leave messes because nobody wants to ask uncomfortable questions. I walked into the room before Rachel could answer. Grant smiled and lifted his coffee cup. We were just talking about financial planning. I spent 32 years recording testimony in courtrooms, I said. I know the difference between financial planning and calculating what someone owns. His smile tightened. No offense intended. I told myself I was being overly sensitive. Grief can make ordinary questions sound like threats. That was what I wanted to believe. Then my paper bills stopped arriving. At first, I assumed the postal service had misplaced them. But when I called the electric company, the representative told me my account had been changed to paperless billing. The email address on file belonged to Rachel. When I confronted her, she barely looked up from her phone. You kept forgetting to open them. I never missed a payment. I'm making things easier. By taking my bills, by helping you. Her tone suggested that refusing her help would prove I needed it. I asked her to restore my mailing preferences. She said she would, but the bills never returned. Not long after that, I found a business card on the kitchen counter from a locksmith named Paul Henderson. When I asked Grant about it, he said they were considering a smart security system. There have been break-ins 2 streets over, he explained. I haven't heard about any break-ins. Most people don't advertise that sort of thing. The following week, a man arrived while I was folding laundry. Through the upstairs window, I watched him examine the front door, the side entrance, and the basement lock. He measured each frame and wrote the numbers on a clipboard. When I went downstairs, Rachel was standing beside him. Is something wrong with the doors? I asked. The locksmith looked at Rachel before answering. She said you were planning a full replacement. Rachel laughed lightly. Eventually, Mom. These locks are ancient. They work, for now. I told the man we were not replacing anything, and he left. Rachel waited until the door closed. You embarrassed me. It is my house. We live here too, temporarily. Her expression changed. The warmth disappeared so quickly that I wondered whether it had ever been real. You keep saying that, she said, but we're the ones taking care of this place now. I looked around the hallway. Samuel's photographs were gone. Rachel's decorations covered the walls. Grant's boots sat beside the door. Their mail filled the entry table. Without asking permission, they had begun turning my home into proof that they belonged there. That evening, Noah found me in the garden room. The room stood at the far end of the property behind the kitchen and beyond a narrow enclosed passage. It had once been part of a carriage house long before Samuel and I bought the main residence. My mother later helped me purchase it separately, using money she had inherited from her parents. Most people assumed it was simply another room in the house. I had never corrected them. Noah sat across from me at the old wooden desk. Grandma, he said quietly, are Mom and Dad really leaving in 3 months? I looked toward the closed door. That was the agreement. He picked at a scratch in the desktop. Dad told someone on the phone that we finally had a permanent address. The words made my stomach tighten. Did he say anything else? Noah shook his head, but his eyes told me there was more. I did not press him. He was a child caught between people he loved, and I would not make him choose sides. That night I lay awake, listening to footsteps move through the house. A cabinet opened downstairs, papers rustled. Then I heard Grant's voice beneath my bedroom floor. This place could solve everything, he said. Rachel answered too softly for me to understand. Grant spoke again. We just have to make her see that we know what's best. I stared at the ceiling until morning. I still loved my daughter. I still wanted to believe she had moved into my home because she needed shelter, not because she wanted ownership. But love can make warning signs look like misunderstandings. And by the time I finally understood what Rachel and Grant had been preparing to do, they had already learned where I kept nearly every important document in the house. Nearly every one. The fall happened on a Thursday morning. I had just poured water into the kettle when my right foot caught the edge of a rug Rachel had placed beneath the kitchen table. I reached for the counter, but my fingers slipped against the smooth granite. The pain came before I hit the floor. It shot through my left knee like a bolt of electricity so sharp that I could not even scream at first. I lay there staring at the ceiling while the kettle began to whistle. Noah found me. Grandma. He dropped his backpack and knelt beside me, his face white with fear. Don't move, he said. I'm calling 911. Rachel and Grant came downstairs while Noah was speaking to the dispatcher. Rachel crouched near my head and touched my shoulder. What were you doing walking around without your cane? My cane was beside the refrigerator. You should have waited for someone. It was a strange thing to say. I had lived independently in that house for 37 years, yet suddenly making tea in my own kitchen sounded like reckless behavior. At the hospital, an X-ray showed damage to the joint. The doctor said I would need knee replacement surgery. It's not optional anymore, he told me. Without surgery, your mobility will continue to deteriorate. I agreed because I had already spent months pretending the pain was manageable. The operation was scheduled for the following Monday. During the days before surgery, Rachel became unusually attentive. She packed my robe slippers, reading glasses, medication list, and insurance cards. She also began asking questions. Where do you keep the house insurance policy in the filing cabinet? And the account numbers for utilities, why? So I can keep everything running while you're recovering. I'll only be gone a few days. The doctor said rehabilitation could take weeks. Grant entered the bedroom carrying a black folder. You should let Rachel handle things temporarily, he said. There's no point worrying about bills while you're trying to heal. Inside the folder was a legal document titled Limited Durable Power of Attorney. The word durable made me uneasy. I didn't ask for this. It's standard, Rachel said. The hospital social worker mentioned it. I later learned that was not true. Grant pulled a chair beside the bed and opened the document. This only allows Rachel to pay your medical expenses and manage household bills if you're unable to do it yourself. I can read. His smile faded for half a second. Of course. I put on my glasses and went through every paragraph. 32 years as a court reporter had taught me something important. People often hid dangerous intentions inside boring language. The document authorized Rachel to communicate with my insurance company, pay medical expenses, maintain utilities, and access one checking account, used for household costs. It did not authorize her to sell, transfer mortgage, or gift real estate. It also included a section that specifically prohibited the agent from transferring property to herself. I pointed to it. This stays. Grant leaned closer. Nobody planned to remove it. I want the page numbered and initialed. Rachel sighed. Mom, we're trying to help. Then you won't mind. I initialed each page and Rachel did the same. I wrote the date beside every signature. Then I made 3 copies. One went into the folder for the hospital. One went into the top drawer of my bedroom desk. The third I folded inside a plain envelope. That evening, while Rachel prepared dinner, I walked slowly to the garden room. The brass key felt cold in my palm. Inside, the room dust floated in the late afternoon light. Samuel's old desk stood beneath the window, still covered with pencil marks from years of work. I opened the fireproof cabinet and placed the envelope beneath the separate deed for Unit B. Samuel had always teased me about keeping duplicate records. One day he used to say, "You're going to file a receipt for breathing." But careful records had saved more than one case during my years at the courthouse. I closed the cabinet and locked it. The morning of surgery, Rachel drove me to the hospital. Grant came with us, saying he wanted to support the family. Noah asked to come, but Rachel told him he would only miss school and sit in a waiting room. Before we left, he hugged me longer than usual. You'll come home, right? Of course I will. He looked past me toward his father. I noticed the fear in his eyes, but I mistook it for worry about the operation. At the hospital, a nurse reviewed my medical history and placed a plastic bracelet around my wrist. An administrative employee named Mrs. Daniels came in with a clipboard. She checked my identification and asked whether I understood the power of attorney document. Yes, I said. It is limited to medical bills and normal household expenses. Mrs. Daniels looked at Rachel. And you understand you cannot use it to transfer Mrs. Freeman's property or benefit yourself. Rachel hesitated. Only for a second. I understand. Mrs. Daniels watched us sign. She stamped the witness section and handed the original back to me. I placed it inside the black folder with my insurance papers. Grant immediately reached for it. I'll keep that safe. I held on to the folder. It stays with my belongings. They could get lost while you're in surgery. The hospital has a secure storage process. Rachel touched my arm. Mom, please. You're already nervous. Let Grant take care of it. I studied my daughter's face. She looked tired and concerned exactly as a loving daughter should, so I loosened my grip. Grant took the folder. I'll bring it back as soon as you're in recovery. As the orderly prepared to wheel me away, Noah appeared at the end of the corridor. He had skipped first period and taken a city bus to the hospital. Rachel was furious. What are you doing here? I wanted to see Grandma. He came to my bedside and squeezed my hand. Then he noticed the black folder under Grant's arm. Why does Dad have Grandma's papers? Grant's jaw tightened. Because adults are handling things. Noah ignored him and looked at me. Do you really want him to keep those? The question embarrassed me. Noah, your father is helping. He glanced at Grant, then lowered his voice. Grandma, Dad was copying your signature last night. Everything around me seemed to become quieter. What did you say? Rachel stepped between us. He's confused. He saw Grant signing a contractor form. I know what I saw, Noah said. Grant's voice hardened. That's enough. The anesthesiologist arrived before I could question Noah further. A nurse injected medication into my IV, and the edges of the room began to blur. The last thing I saw was Grant standing near the doorway with my documents pressed against his chest. When I woke several hours later, my knee felt like it had been filled with fire. Rachel sat beside the bed, scrolling through her phone. Where is the folder? I asked. She looked up. What folder? The one Grant took. He brought your insurance card back. And the power of attorney. I'm sure it's at home. I asked to see my personal belongings. A nurse brought me a clear plastic bag containing my purse, glasses, and clothing. The folder was not there. Neither was the copy I had placed in the bedroom drawer, though I would not discover that until later. Rachel gave me water and told me to rest. But I could not stop thinking about Noah's warning. That night, while my daughter slept in the chair beside me, I stared at the dark hospital window and repeated the exact language of the document in my mind. No real estate transfers, no gifts, no benefit to the agent. Grant had taken one copy. He may even have found the second. But there was still a third copy locked inside the garden room beneath a deed neither he nor Rachel knew existed. For the first time, I wondered whether my habit of keeping records was no longer simply caution. It might be the only thing standing between me and losing everything. 3 weeks after my surgery, the physical therapist smiled and said the words I had been waiting to hear. I think you're ready to go home. Home. For 23 days, that single word had carried me through every painful exercise, every sleepless night, and every humiliating moment when I needed someone to help me stand. I imagined my own bed, Samuel's photograph on the nightstand, the maple tree outside my bedroom window. I even missed the creaking sound the hallway floor made every winter morning. Rachel looked surprised when the discharge nurse entered my room. I thought she'd be here another week, she said. The doctor cleared her this morning, the nurse replied. Her recovery has gone better than expected. Something flickered across Rachel's face. Not happiness, not relief, disappointment. It lasted only a second before she smiled. Well, that's wonderful. As we packed my things, I noticed Grant wasn't there. He had business, Rachel explained. He couldn't come help bring me home. He's handling some paperwork. The words stayed with me during the drive back to Richmond. Rachel hardly spoke. Instead of asking how my knee felt, or whether I wanted to stop for lunch, she kept checking her phone. Every few minutes, she glanced toward the clock on the dashboard, almost as though she were racing against time. The closer we came to my neighborhood, the quieter she became. Then she drove past my driveway. You missed the turn. I know. She pulled over half a block away. I think it's better if you walk the last little bit. I stared at her. My knee was replaced less than a month ago. It'll be good exercise. Something inside me tightened. I slowly opened the passenger door, picked up my cane, and climbed out. Rachel drove away before I had taken 10 steps. For a moment, I simply watched her SUV disappear around the corner. The silence felt strange. Usually by noon, I could hear children riding bicycles or neighbors mowing lawns. Today, the entire street seemed to be holding its breath. I walked slowly toward my house. Each step sent a dull ache through my knee. When I finally reached the front porch, I smiled despite the pain. There it was, the red brick, the white shutters. Samuel had painted himself. The flower pots I had planted every spring since we bought the place. I reached into my purse and pulled out my key ring. The brass key slid into the deadbolt. It stopped halfway. I pulled it out, tried again. Nothing. I checked the number on the mailbox. This was my house. I inserted the key a third time. It would not fit. Confused, I looked closer. The entire lock had been replaced. My stomach turned cold. I rang the doorbell. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps. Rachel opened the wooden door but left the glass storm door locked between us. She didn't invite me inside. Instead, she folded her arms. I didn't think you'd get discharged today. I stared at her. My key doesn't work. We changed all the locks. Why? For everyone's safety. My safety. Our families. I laughed because the sentence was too absurd to understand. What family? Rachel's expression never changed. The family living here. I'm living here. She shook her head. No, Mom. For a moment, I honestly thought she was joking. Then I noticed something behind her. My hallway. Only it didn't look like mine anymore. The antique table Samuel had restored was gone. The framed wedding photograph had disappeared from the wall. The rug my mother had woven decades earlier had been replaced with a modern gray runner. Even the coat rack by the stairs was different. The house already looked as though I had never existed there. I pressed my hand against the glass. What happened? Rachel inhaled slowly. You can't live alone anymore. I wasn't alone. You need supervised care. I never agreed to that. We've made arrangements. She spoke with the calm voice people use when discussing dinner reservations, not someone's life. What arrangements? A very nice assisted living community. I am going home. You are not. My heart began pounding. This is my house. Rachel looked directly into my eyes. It isn't anymore. Before I could answer, Grant appeared beside her. He carried a thick manila envelope. I knew this conversation would be difficult, he said. You knew nothing. He ignored me. Instead, he opened the envelope and removed several official-looking papers. The property has already been transferred. I frowned. What are you talking about? You signed everything. I absolutely did not. Grant calmly pointed to a page. There. Even through the glass, I recognized my own signature, or something that looked frighteningly close to it. This isn't real. You signed after giving Rachel power of attorney. The power of attorney didn't allow, it gave Rachel authority. No. I interrupted him so sharply that both of them fell silent. It gave Rachel authority to manage bills while I recovered. Grant shrugged. You probably don't remember every document you signed before surgery. I felt as though someone had struck me. I remember every page. Pain medication affects memory. I wasn't medicated when I signed. Rachel finally spoke again. Mom. No. You've been forgetting things. I have not. The doctor said recovery would be easier if you weren't living independently. They never said that. Grant stepped closer to the glass. The important thing is that you're safe. I looked from him to Rachel. Neither one of them looked frightened. Neither one looked guilty. They looked prepared, as though this conversation had been rehearsed many times. Then I noticed the boxes. 6 cardboard boxes sat neatly beside the porch. My handwriting appeared on several labels. Kitchen, books, winter clothes, family photos. Even my favorite blue quilt had been folded into a plastic storage bag. You packed my things. Rachel nodded. We tried to be careful. I could barely breathe. You went through everything. We had to. You had no right. We're trying to help. That sentence again. Always help, always concern, always kindness used like wrapping paper around something cruel. A police cruiser slowly drove down the street. Someone must have called after hearing raised voices. The officer stepped onto the porch. Is everything all right here? Grant immediately handed him the paperwork. My mother-in-law is upset, he explained. She's recovering from surgery. The officer studied the documents. Then he asked me quietly, Ma'am, do you have identification showing this address? My driver's license. He examined it before looking back at Grant. Grant handed him another paper. This deed was recently recorded. The officer compared the names. His expression became uncomfortable. This appears to be a civil property dispute. Civil, I whispered. I live here. Rachel looked down. I know this is hard. I turned toward the officer. They changed the locks while I was in the hospital. He sighed. If ownership is disputed, this has to go through the courts. So you won't let me into my own house. I can't force entry without a court order. The words felt unreal. 40 years of mortgage payments, 37 years of memories, 23 days in the hospital. And suddenly I was standing outside like a trespasser. Neighbors had begun gathering across the street. Mrs. Ellison from 2 houses down covered her mouth with both hands. No one knew what to say. Grant picked up one of my boxes and placed it beside me. We'll have the rest delivered to the assisted living center. I am not going there. You don't have much choice. Rachel refused to look at me. She simply closed the wooden door, then the glass door, then the curtains. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place echoed through my chest. The officer quietly apologized before returning to his cruiser. I stood alone beside my boxes. Homeless. Outside the only home I had ever wanted. As I bent painfully to pick up my purse, I heard someone running. Grandma Noah. He rushed across the front yard before either of his parents noticed. He hugged me carefully, trying not to hurt my knee. I'm sorry, he whispered. His eyes were filled with tears. I tried to stop them. I touched his face. What do you mean? He looked back toward the house. Dad said it has to be sold before the end of next week. My heart skipped. Sold? He nodded. They're meeting with buyers. He leaned closer. They think they already own everything. Everything. As Noah hurried back before his parents saw him, I slowly turned toward the narrow alley running beside the house. At the far end stood an old weathered wooden door. Most people believed it led to a forgotten storage room. Rachel believed that too. Neither she nor Grant had ever asked why I still carried one small brass key on a separate ring. For the first time since they had locked me out, I felt something stronger than grief. Hope. Because while they believed they had taken my entire home, they had no idea they had left me the one room that could destroy everything they had planned. That first night after being locked out of my own home, I slept in a roadside motel less than 3 miles from the house where I had spent almost 4 decades. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. Every time a truck passed on the highway, the thin walls vibrated. My knee throbbed so badly that I could barely climb onto the bed. The motel manager had helped carry my boxes inside after noticing I was struggling. Family disagreement, he asked gently. I smiled without answering. Some kinds of humiliation are too heavy to explain to strangers. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the tiny room. 1 suitcase, 6 cardboard boxes, a purse, a cane. 40 years of building a home had been reduced to what fit inside 200 square feet. I reached for my phone. There was only one person I trusted enough to call. Denise Walker answered on the second ring. Alice, I need a lawyer. She became silent. Tell me everything. For nearly an hour I described every detail, the changed locks, the papers Grant had shown the police officer, the missing folder, the power of attorney, Noah's warning. When I finished, Denise asked only one question. Do you still have any copies of the original power of attorney? Yes. Where? In a place Rachel doesn't know exists. Good. Her voice immediately became firmer. Don't tell anyone where that copy is. Not even Rachel. Especially not Rachel. The following morning, Denise picked me up at the motel. We had known each other for almost 30 years. Back when I worked as a court reporter, Denise had been a young attorney trying her first civil cases. Now she specialized in elder financial abuse. "I wish we'd been meeting under better circumstances," she said as she helped me into her car. "So do I." Instead of driving toward the courthouse, she headed for the Richmond County Recorder's office. "If Grant recorded anything," she explained, "it will be there." The clerk greeted Denise by. Within minutes, we were sitting at a public computer reviewing recently recorded property documents. Then Denise stopped scrolling. "There." She clicked on a file. I felt the blood drain from my face. Across the top were the words, "Quitclaim deed." Grant had been telling the truth about one thing. A deed had been recorded. According to the document, I had voluntarily transferred ownership of Unit A, my primary residence, to Rachel Carter. Transfer for consideration of $10 in love and affection. $10. 40 years of memories. Reduced to a sentence that made it sound as though I had happily handed everything away. I stared at the signature. It looked almost perfect. Almost. Most people would never notice. But I had spent decades recording testimony and comparing signatures attached to sworn statements. There were differences: the pressure on the first letter, the spacing before my last name, the tiny upward stroke beneath the final N. Someone had copied my handwriting. Very well, but not perfectly. "I never signed this." "I know," Denise said quietly. She enlarged the document. "Look here." Near the bottom was a notary seal. "Do you recognize the notary?" I shook my head. Denise wrote the name down. "We'll verify whether she actually witnessed this." Then she looked at the recording information. The deed had been filed at 3:42 p.m. The same afternoon I was lying unconscious in recovery after my knee replacement. I closed my eyes. They recorded it while I was still in the hospital. Denise nodded slowly. "That timing may become very important." She printed several copies. As we walked back toward her office, I asked the question that had been haunting me since yesterday. If the signature is fake, why did the county accept it? Because the recorder's office doesn't decide whether every signature is genuine. They don't. They record documents that appear legally complete. So anyone can just file a forged deed. They can try. And then someone like you has to fight to prove it's fraudulent. The unfairness of that settled heavily on my shoulders. So they steal first. Sometimes. And the victim has to spend months getting everything back. That's why we move quickly. Back at Denise's office, she spread every document across a conference table. She highlighted sections with colored tabs. "This is encouraging." "What is?" She pointed to the quitclaim deed. "It only mentions Unit A." "I don't understand." "Your house isn't legally one property." I smiled for the first time in 2 days. "No. It never was." She leaned back. "So they really don't know." "Apparently not." Years earlier, after my mother passed away, I had inherited enough money to purchase the garden room separately from the rest of the property. The county assigned it its own parcel number, its own legal description, its own deed. Most people assumed it was simply another room attached to the house. Legally, it wasn't. It shared one wall with the main residence, but remained an independent property. Samuel and I had intentionally left it that way because I used it as my private office. Grant had never asked. Rachel had never cared enough to learn. Now their ignorance might become my greatest protection. Denise smiled. "If they try selling the entire property, they can't." "Exactly," she paused. "But we still have a serious problem." "What?" She turned her computer screen toward me. An online commercial real estate listing filled the monitor. Photographs of my home appeared beneath a headline. "Rare development opportunity. Historic property. Large corner lot. Ready for immediate closing." My chest tightened. They've already listed it. They're moving very fast. Denise clicked another page. A development company from Northern Virginia had scheduled a private inspection. Closing date: 8 days away. 8. Not weeks. Days. I gripped the edge of the desk. "They're trying to sell my house before I can challenge the deed." Exactly. And if they succeed, the legal battle becomes much more complicated. I stared at the photographs. Rachel had arranged fresh flowers in my dining room. Grant had polished Samuel's workshop. The listing described the home as owner-occupied. Every sentence felt like another theft. Denise began writing a checklist. We need several things immediately. She numbered each item. The original power of attorney. I have a copy. We'll need it. She wrote another line. Your hospital records. So we can prove I was in surgery. Correct. Another line. Evidence that Grant knowingly exceeded the authority of the power of attorney. How do we find that? She looked directly at me. We prove intent. Meaning, we show he knew exactly what the document allowed and ignored it. Silence filled the room. Then I remembered something. Noah. What about him? He said Grant was copying my signature. Denise nodded thoughtfully. Maybe. But I don't want Noah dragged into court unless absolutely necessary. I agree. She closed the folder. For now, we build the case without him. As I gathered my purse, Denise stopped me. One more question. What? Can you still access the garden room? I reached into my pocket. Attached to a separate keyring was one small brass key. Unlike the keys Rachel had made useless, this one had never left my possession. Yes. What exactly is inside? I thought about the fireproof cabinet, the separate deed, the duplicate power of attorney, years of carefully organized records, and something else. Samuel's old tape recorder, boxes of correspondence, property surveys dating back decades. Everything I had once considered unnecessary to keep. Everything Grant believed had already disappeared with the rest of my files. I closed my hand around the brass key. More than they could ever imagine. Denise smiled. Then tonight after dark, you and I are going to visit the only part of your property they don't know they failed to steal. As I looked out her office window toward the city skyline, I realized something that had never crossed my mind before. Grant and Rachel believed they had already won. They thought I was an elderly woman, recovering from surgery, living alone in a motel, frightened and powerless. They had no idea I was no longer trying to get back inside the house. I was preparing to prove they had built their entire plan on one fatal mistake. They stole the part of my property they could see. They never stopped to ask who truly owned the room they couldn't enter. By the time darkness settled over Richmond, my knee had stiffened from sitting all afternoon in Denise's office. She insisted on driving. You shouldn't be climbing fences or walking long distances after surgery. I don't plan on climbing anything. You've surprised me twice already this week. Despite everything that had happened, I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh since Rachel had locked me out. We parked half a block away from my house with the headlights off. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Porch lights glowed softly. A sprinkler clicked rhythmically somewhere across the street. If someone had driven past, they would have seen nothing unusual. Just another quiet evening in an old Virginia neighborhood. Only I knew that my own home had become the center of a carefully planned betrayal. Denise reached into the back seat and handed me a small flashlight. Use this only if absolutely necessary. I know the room well enough to walk through it blind. I don't doubt that. She looked directly at me. But if anything feels wrong, leave immediately. Documents can be replaced. My husband's memories can't. Neither of us spoke after that. I slowly made my way down the narrow alley running beside the property. Every step reminded me that my new knee was not yet ready for adventures like this. Still, pain was easier to endure than helplessness. The alley ended behind a weathered brick wall covered with climbing ivy. There it was, the old wooden door. Most people never noticed it. Children assumed it led to a storage shed. Delivery drivers ignored it. Even Rachel had once asked why I never painted it. I had simply smiled and changed the subject. Now I understood why I had never felt the urge to replace it. Some things survive precisely because everyone believes they are unimportant. I removed the small brass key from my pocket. Unlike the keys Rachel had rendered useless, this one still bore tiny scratches Samuel had accidentally made years earlier while fixing the lock. I slid it into the keyhole. For one terrifying second, it refused to turn. Then, click. The sound echoed through the quiet alley. I slowly pushed the heavy door inward. The familiar scent greeted me immediately. Old books, cedar wood, dust, coffee. Samuel always joked that the garden room smelled like history. He was right. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating shelves lined with binders, legal pads, and photo albums. Nothing had been touched. Nothing had been rearranged. Unlike the main house, this room still belonged entirely to my memories. I stood silently for several moments. This had once been my office. When I worked as a court reporter, I spent countless evenings here reviewing transcripts while Samuel brought me coffee. After retirement, I turned it into a reading room. Every shelf held a piece of our life together. Denise stepped inside behind me. So this is the famous garden room. Yes, it feels separate. It legally is. She smiled. Good. I walked toward the fireplace. Above it hung the last photograph Samuel and I had taken together. Neither Rachel nor Grant had ever bothered to enter this room often enough to notice it. Grant had considered it wasted space. Rachel called it clutter. To me, it was sacred. The fireproof cabinet stood exactly where I had left it years earlier. I knelt carefully. My knee protested immediately. Denise reached over. Let me. No. I inserted another key. The cabinet opened with a dull metallic sound. Inside were neatly organized folders, birth certificates, insurance policies, tax returns, military records belonging to Samuel's father. Every document labeled in my handwriting. I removed the envelope containing the duplicate power of attorney. Denise compared it with the electronic copy we had printed earlier. This confirms everything. She pointed toward the paragraph restricting property transfers. They ignored this completely. Next, I removed another folder. Across the front, I had written, Unit B Original Deed. Denise carefully unfolded the document. Well, she laughed quietly. This changes everything. The legal description covered 3 pages. Separate parcel number. Separate tax identification. Separate title history dating back decades. This room has never been part of Unit A, Denise said. Exactly. And any structural changes affecting this wall. She looked around slowly. Require the consent of both property owners. I nodded. When Samuel and I remodeled the kitchen, we had to file separate permits because one supporting wall belongs to Unit B. Denise looked almost impressed. Grant has no idea what he's walking into. He assumed one roof meant one property. He made an expensive assumption. I continued searching the cabinet. Beneath the deed lay an aging blue binder. Samuel's handwriting appeared across the cover. Property files. Inside were original surveys, prepared when the property had first been divided decades earlier. Architectural drawings, boundary maps, permit approvals. Every document established exactly where Unit A ended and Unit B began. Then something unexpected slipped from between the pages. A folded sheet of notebook paper. Samuel's handwriting. My throat tightened. Alice. If you're reading this after I'm gone, you're probably organizing papers again. Please don't throw away the old surveys. People rarely appreciate boring documents until they're the only thing standing between truth and lies. Love always, Sam. I couldn't speak. Denise quietly stepped away to give me a moment. I pressed the note against my chest. Even after death, Samuel somehow seemed to be protecting me. After several minutes, I carefully placed the note back inside the binder. Then Denise noticed another folder. What is this courthouse recordings? I smiled faintly. Old audio cassettes of hearings and interviews. Samuel and I often recorded family stories during holidays. The recorder itself still sat on a nearby shelf. Everything in the room remained exactly as we had left it. Then voices, very faint, coming through the shared wall. Denise immediately switched off her flashlight. We stood perfectly still. Grant's voice drifted through the silence. The buyers won't care. Rachel sounded nervous. What if Mom challenges the paperwork? She won't. She already did. She has nowhere to go. A drawer slammed somewhere inside the main house. Grant continued. The development company wants the entire building demolished anyway. Demolished. I instinctively looked around the room. Samuel's books, our photographs. The window where he watched birds every morning. Everything reduced to rubble. Rachel spoke again. What about that back room? You mean the junk room? Yes. We'll clear it out after closing. You're sure it's included? Grant laughed. It's attached to the house. My eyes met Denise's. Neither of us moved. Grant continued speaking. Once we get the money, none of this matters. How soon? A week? And Mom? She'll already be in assisted living. She keeps saying she'll fight. She doesn't have the documents. I almost smiled. If only he knew. Grant lowered his voice. The important thing is getting paid before anyone starts asking complicated questions. Denise slowly reached into her purse. Without making a sound, she handed me my old digital voice recorder. I turned it on. Every word now entered the tiny microphone. Grant kept talking. The demolition permit is practically guaranteed, even the garden room. Especially that room. It'll make the lot more valuable. Rachel hesitated. I still feel guilty. For what she looked so hurt today. Grant sighed impatiently. Stop thinking emotionally. She is my mother. And she's standing between us and a fresh start. Silence followed. Then Grant spoke again. After closing, none of this will matter. Those words settled heavily inside me. Not because they frightened me, because they revealed exactly who he was. To Grant, my home wasn't where my husband died. It wasn't where Rachel took her first steps. It wasn't where Noah spent Christmas mornings. It was a transaction, nothing more. The conversation drifted farther into the house until we could no longer hear clearly. Denise finally whispered that recording alone could become very important. I nodded. But before I could answer, metal scraped against wood. Very close. The interior door connecting the garden room to the main house. Someone was touching the handle. The knob turned once, then again, slowly, testing. My heart began pounding. Denise froze beside me. The lock held. Whoever stood on the other side tried once more before stopping. Rachel's voice sounded only inches away. Grant, no key. It won't open. Forget it. Their footsteps disappeared. Neither of them realized that I was standing on the opposite side of the very door they believed led to nothing important. I looked around the room one more time. For weeks I had thought the garden room was simply the place they forgot. Now I understood the truth. It wasn't just the one room they couldn't enter. It was the one room that still contained every piece of evidence capable of bringing their entire plan crashing down. Neither Denise nor I moved until we were absolutely certain Rachel and Grant had walked away from the connecting door. Even after the footsteps disappeared, I could still hear my own heartbeat. It was astonishing how quickly a familiar room could become a hiding place. Denise let out a slow breath. I think we've heard enough for one night. I don't. She looked at me. They believe they own everything. If they're searching the house for paperwork, they may eventually remember this room. They don't even know what this room is. They will if they become desperate. She was right. Desperate people rarely stayed careless. I walked back to Samuel's old desk. Its oak surface was covered with small scratches left by decades of use. On the top shelf stood a framed photograph of Rachel at 12 years old, proudly holding the blue ribbon she had won at her school science fair. Samuel had insisted we display it in the garden room because Rachel said it made her feel like she was important enough to have an office. I picked up the frame. How did we get here? Denise didn't answer. There wasn't an answer simple enough to explain how a little girl who once ran into this room after school now believed she could erase me from my own home. I carefully placed the photograph into a storage box. Not because I wanted to hide it, because I suddenly realized nothing inside this room should remain unprotected. We began photographing everything, every drawer, every cabinet, every document. Denise insisted on creating a digital record before we removed a single page. If they ever claim you fabricated evidence after the dispute began, she explained, we'll have proof showing exactly where everything was found. Years of legal experience had made her think 3 steps ahead. I admired that. Then I opened another drawer beneath Samuel's desk. Inside were several folders containing old correspondence from the years when we had renovated the property. Most of it was ordinary. Invoices, contractor estimates, permit applications. Then I found a thick envelope addressed to me in Samuel's handwriting. Property division file. I frowned. I haven't opened this in years. Inside were letters exchanged with the county planning office nearly 20 years earlier. One particular letter immediately caught Denise's attention. She read it twice before handing it to me. The letter confirmed that the shared structural wall between Unit A and Unit B could not legally be altered without written authorization from both property owners. Grant wanted to demolish the building. He couldn't even remove that wall without my signature. That alone could stop construction, Denise whispered. If the buyers know, they're about to. I continued searching. Beneath the correspondence lay an old external hard drive. I smiled faintly. I forgot this even existed. What is it, my backup files? From work and home. During my years as a court reporter, I had developed a habit of scanning important documents. Paper could burn, computers could fail, so I kept multiple copies in different places. Samuel used to tease me that I trusted filing systems more than memory. That habit now seemed almost prophetic. Denise connected the drive to her laptop. Hundreds of scanned files appeared. Insurance records, tax returns, old deeds. Then she stopped scrolling. Alice. What? She clicked one folder. POA final signed. Inside was a scanned copy of the exact power of attorney I had signed before surgery. Time-stamped. Dated. Every page complete. Every initial visible. This is excellent, she said. No one can claim you altered the paper version. Because I scanned it months before surgery, no. She pointed at the metadata. The scan was created the morning before your operation. That timestamp mattered. If Grant later tried to claim additional pages had existed, all along the digital record would prove otherwise. We made several encrypted copies immediately. As Denise saved them, I wandered toward the bookshelves. Behind several legal reference books sat another object I had almost forgotten. A compact document scanner. It still worked. Without wasting time, we scanned every original document stored in the cabinet. Multiple digital backups, cloud storage, encrypted flash drives. By midnight, we had copies stored in 4 separate locations. For the first time, Denise said, "I feel like we're ahead." I wanted to believe her. Then my phone vibrated. Rachel. I stared at the screen. She never calls this late. Answer. I accepted the call but said nothing. Rachel spoke first. Mom. Yes. Where are you, a motel? You shouldn't be alone. The concern in her voice almost sounded genuine. Really, I've been thinking. So have I. Silence lingered. Finally, she said quietly, "This doesn't have to become ugly." I almost laughed. "You changed every lock while I was in the hospital." "I know. You packed my belongings." "I know. You told the police I couldn't come into my own house." She didn't answer. Instead, she changed the subject. "If you just cooperate, everything will be easier." For whom? For everyone. No, Rachel. Another pause. Then her tone changed, more cautious. "Mom, did you happen to keep copies of your paperwork?" I looked at Denise. She slowly shook her head. "What paperwork, you know?" "Insurance forms. I've always kept copies." Rachel inhaled sharply. "Where, why, no reason." "I don't believe that." She hesitated again. "Grant says we need to organize everything. Grant seems to need a great many things." Her voice became firmer. "If you have any legal documents, you should give them to me." "Why?" "So nothing gets lost." I closed my eyes. That phrase again. Helping, organizing, protecting. Always the same words. Always hiding another purpose. "I'll keep my own records. You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No, sweetheart." My voice remained calm. "You already made it as hard as possible." I ended the call. Denise immediately wrote down everything Rachel had asked. She wasn't calling to reconcile. "I know. She was checking whether you found your documents." She sounded nervous. "She should be." We packed the last of the scanned files into a secure storage box. As I locked the fireproof cabinet again, my eyes fell upon one final object resting beneath the lowest shelf, an old leather portfolio. I almost left it there. Then curiosity made me open it. Inside were architectural drawings Samuel had commissioned years earlier. Folded between them was something unexpected. A handwritten notebook. Grant's name appeared on the first page. What is this? I flipped through it. Not Grant's notebook. Mine. Years ago, when Grant first moved into the house, I had written occasional observations about renovation expenses, repair estimates, and conversations regarding property maintenance. At first, the entries were ordinary. Then, several months after Rachel moved in, they became more detailed. One entry stopped me cold. Grant asked today whether the garden room is included under the main deed. I answered only that the property records are complicated. He seemed disappointed. I looked up at Denise. He asked me, and I never answered. Another entry. Grant again asked whether any structures could be removed during future renovations. I told him changes involving the garden room require separate legal review. Denise's eyes widened. You actually wrote this? Yes. And dated it. Every page was dated. My habit of documenting conversations suddenly became far more significant. If Grant later claimed he had innocently believed the garden room belonged to Unit A, my notebook suggested otherwise. He had asked, more than once, which meant he already suspected the property was legally unusual. This could help establish knowledge, Denise said quietly. In other words, if he proceeds with the sale anyway, it's much harder for him to argue it was an honest mistake. For the first time since being thrown out of my home, I felt the balance beginning to shift. Not because of luck, because every ordinary habit I had developed over decades, keeping notes, making copies, labeling folders, saving letters, was slowly dismantling the lies Grant had built. We switched off every light before leaving. I locked the garden room carefully behind us. As we reached the alley, I looked back one last time. The small wooden door looked exactly as it always had, plain, weathered, forgettable. Rachel and Grant believed it hid nothing worth seeing. Tomorrow they would continue planning the sale of my home. Tomorrow they would continue believing they had destroyed every piece of evidence. Neither of them realized that the smallest room on the property had quietly preserved the one thing they could no longer afford to face: the truth. The next morning began before sunrise. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the sound of the deadbolt locking me out of my own house. By 7 o'clock, Denise and I were already seated in her office with coffee growing cold beside stacks of documents. She pinned a large sheet of paper to the whiteboard. Across the top, she wrote 3 words. What do they need? They're behaving as though they're racing a clock, she said. So let's find out why. She drew 3 columns: money, time, risk. Everything else, she explained, would eventually fit into one of those categories. We spent nearly 2 hours reconstructing Grant's timeline: the forged deed, the lock replacement, the assisted living paperwork, the scheduled closing. None of it looked impulsive. Every step depended on the previous one. This wasn't a family argument, Denise finally said. It was a project. That sentence stayed with me. Because projects have schedules, deadlines, budgets, and someone always expects to be paid. Denise picked up the phone. I want to speak with a title investigator. An hour later, we were sitting across from Martin Ellis, an independent title examiner who had spent nearly 30 years reviewing property histories throughout Virginia. After introducing himself, he spread several maps across the conference table. I reviewed the public records this morning. He adjusted his glasses. Your situation is unusual. In what way? I asked. He pointed toward 2 shaded rectangles. This is Unit A. Then he tapped another outline attached behind it. And this is Unit B. The garden room. Correct. He looked directly at me. The problem is that whoever prepared the sales package described the entire structure as one unified parcel. Denise leaned forward. Meaning, the buyer believes they're purchasing everything. But Rachel only claims ownership of Unit A. Exactly. Martin folded his hands. If the development company discovers the property description is inaccurate before closing, they'll almost certainly suspend the transaction. My shoulders relaxed slightly. So they can't sell everything. Not legally. But they might try. Martin nodded. And that's what concerns me. He slid another document toward us. A preliminary financing report. I frowned. What am I looking at? Denise answered first. A commercial bridge loan. Martin nodded. Grant appears to have negotiated temporary financing based on the expected sale. I looked at him in confusion. I thought the house was already paid off. It is. So why borrow money? Martin pointed to the dates. This loan matures immediately after closing. Meaning, if the property sale fails, Denise finished the sentence. He still owes the lender. Martin nodded again. And probably more than he can repay. For the first time, I understood why Grant had sounded so desperate through the wall. He wasn't simply trying to steal my home, he needed the sale to happen. Without it, his financial house might collapse. As Martin gathered his pace, he hesitated. There was one more thing. What? I reviewed permits submitted for the property. My heart quickened. There are demolition inquiries. Denise and I exchanged a glance. Grant had told Rachel exactly that. Martin continued. The developer intends to remove nearly every existing structure, including the garden room, Samuel's office, our photographs, the handwritten notes he had left me. Everything. After Martin left, Denise remained unusually quiet. Finally, she opened another folder. I've been waiting to show you this. Inside was a copy of an assisted living admission packet. My name appeared across the top. I had never seen it before. What is this? It arrived through a records request. I flipped through the pages. Medical history, emergency contacts, insurance information. Then I reached a physician certification. According to the form, I suffered from progressive cognitive impairment. I stopped reading. I never received this diagnosis. You didn't. The physician whose name appeared on the form had never examined me. Another page stated that I required assistance managing finances because I could no longer understand legal documents. My hands began trembling. Rachel signed this. Yes. And she declared you unable to make financial decisions. I stared at my own daughter's signature. Every lie had been carefully prepared. Not one, not two, dozens. Denise placed another page beside it. If this facility had accepted you before anyone questioned the paperwork, I could have been declared incompetent, at least temporarily. And while I was there, they would argue every objection you made resulted from confusion. I closed the folder. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. How many nights had Rachel sat at my kitchen table completing these forms while I slept upstairs believing my daughter was protecting me? My phone vibrated. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Hello? A whisper came through the speaker. Grandma. Noah. I only have a minute. His voice shook. Dad isn't home. Are you all right? Yes. He lowered his voice even further. I found something. What? He keeps a notebook. My heart quickened. What kind of notebook? The one where he writes money. Can you explain? I took pictures. I immediately looked at Denise. She nodded encouragingly. Don't risk yourself, I told Noah. I'm okay. What did you see? He wrote how the money gets divided after the sale. I waited. Your name isn't anywhere. I almost laughed bitterly. I wasn't expecting it to be. But Mom's isn't really there either. That caught my attention. What do you mean she gets one small amount? How small? I don't know exactly. And the rest? Dad. All of it. I think so. Noah hesitated. There are words I don't understand. Like what? He quietly read from one of the photographs. Business account. Debt payoff. Florida condo. Travel. Consulting. I looked at Denise. She was already taking notes. Noah. Yes. Does your mother know? I don't think so. Another pause. Grandma? What? I heard Dad talking. About what? He said once the sale is done, everybody starts over. What does that mean? I think... His voice broke. I think he doesn't mean all of us. Before I could answer, another voice echoed faintly in the background. Who's on the phone, Grant? I have to go. Noah. The call disconnected. Silence filled Denise's office. Finally, she said softly, Rachel believes she's stealing a house. But Grant is stealing from everyone, including her. I had never imagined I would feel pity for the daughter who had locked me outside. Yet for the first time I realized Rachel might not fully understand the role she had accepted. She wasn't the architect. She was another piece on Grant's board. That realization didn't erase what she had done. It didn't excuse changing the locks. It didn't excuse the forged documents. But it explained something I had struggled to understand. Rachel had become cruel. Grant had become calculating. Those were not the same thing. Late that afternoon, while Denise prepared emergency court filings, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Rachel. A text message. Can we talk? I stared at the screen. A second message arrived. Not at the house, at the garden room. My pulse slowed. She knew about the room, or at least she remembered it existed. I typed only 3 words. What do you want? Her reply came almost immediately. The truth. I showed the message to Denise. She read it twice before looking up. No. No. You don't meet her alone. What if she's finally ready to tell me everything? Denise shook her head. No, Alice. She pointed toward the whiteboard covered with timelines and evidence. People who tell the truth don't wait until the day before closing. I looked once more at Rachel's message. The truth. Perhaps she really wanted to confess. Perhaps she wanted to negotiate. Or perhaps Grant had finally realized the little room behind the house wasn't as meaningless as he once believed. Whatever waited behind tomorrow's meeting, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The next conversation between my daughter and me would decide whether there was still anything left to save besides my house. The following afternoon, I arrived at the garden room 15 minutes early. Denise insisted on coming with me. She remained inside the room while I stood just outside the old wooden door that faced the narrow alley. We agreed on one rule before Rachel arrived. The door would never open wider than necessary. No one except me would step inside. Not yet. I unlocked the weathered door and left it open only a few inches. Sunlight spilled across the worn wooden floor where Samuel had once built model boats with Noah during summer vacations. For a moment I closed my eyes. This room had witnessed birthdays, Christmas mornings, quiet evenings, and countless conversations. Now it was about to witness something I had prayed would never happen. A mother confronting her own daughter like a stranger. Exactly at 3 o'clock, Rachel appeared at the end of the alley. She walked alone. No Grant, no Noah. She stopped several feet away. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. She looked exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes. Her shoulders slumped beneath a gray sweater that seemed too large for her. She looked older than 42. Grief, guilt, and sleepless nights can age a person faster than time. Mom, I nodded. Rachel. She glanced toward the narrow opening in the door. So, this is where you've been. I've been wherever I needed to be. She tried to smile. It still smells like Dad's coffee. That caught me off guard. You remember that? Of course I do. Her voice softened. I remember everything. I wanted to believe her. Instead, I remembered standing outside my own front door while she watched me through locked glass. You said you wanted to talk. I did. Then talk. She folded her arms tightly across her chest. I never wanted things to happen like this. But they did. We were desperate. I waited. Grant had always filled silence with excuses. Rachel filled it with hesitation. Finally, she looked directly at me. The house, she stopped, was becoming too much. For whom? For everyone. I wasn't asking everyone. She looked down. For us. I nodded slowly. So you decided to take it? No. You changed every lock. I know. You packed my belongings. I know. You signed paperwork saying I couldn't manage my own life. Tears gathered in her eyes. I know. Every answer sounded the same. Not denial, not apology, only acknowledgement. You knew exactly what you were doing. She wiped at her eyes. I convinced myself it was temporary. You convinced yourself I wouldn't fight. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward the garden room again. I forgot this place existed, I noticed. I thought it was just an old storage room. It never was, she frowned. What do you mean? I opened the door another inch, only enough for her to see part of Samuel's desk. No farther. I wasn't trying to come in. Good. She looked confused. Why won't you let me inside? Because you no longer have permission. Those words hurt me almost as much as they hurt her. For the first time since arriving, Rachel looked genuinely shocked. You don't trust me. I laughed quietly. After everything that's happened, does that surprise you? She had no answer. Instead, she changed the subject. Grant says this room belongs to the house. Grant says many things. Doesn't it? I reached inside the doorway and picked up a folder. Without handing it to her, I opened it. Parcel number 18441A. She stared blankly. What? That's your property. Then I opened another document. Parcel number 18441B. She looked between the pages. I don't understand. This room, I gently touched the old wooden door, is legally separate. Her forehead creased. Separate. It always has been. No. Yes. But it's attached. So is a duplex. She shook her head repeatedly. Grant never said, I imagine he didn't know. She stared at the documents as though trying to force them to change. That isn't possible. It is. You mean? I nodded. You don't own this room. She whispered. You still do. I always did. The color slowly drained from her face. She looked back toward the main house, then toward me, then back again, almost as though the entire property had suddenly become unfamiliar. Before she could speak again, footsteps echoed from the alley entrance. Heavy, fast, Grant. He rounded the corner carrying his truck keys in one hand. His confident smile disappeared the instant he saw me standing at the garden room door. There you are. He ignored Rachel completely. We've been looking for you. I wasn't hiding. He glanced toward the narrow opening. So that's where you've been keeping everything. What exactly do you think I'm keeping? He stepped forward. I'm going inside. No, he laughed. You don't get to decide that. I already have. He reached for the door. I didn't move. Neither did Denise inside. Grant wrapped his hand around the edge of the door and pulled. It stopped immediately. He frowned. Move. No. This room is part of the house. It is attached to the house. Same thing. It isn't. I calmly lifted the certified copy of the deed. Parcel 18 to 441B. His expression changed. Only slightly. But I noticed. So I am standing on property you do not own. He forced a laugh. That's ridiculous. Is it? I read the legal description aloud. Every boundary, every measurement, every reference to the recorded subdivision. Grant's smile slowly disappeared. Rachel looked back and forth between us. You knew? She wasn't asking me. She was asking Grant. He answered without looking at her. It doesn't matter. It matters enough that you're trying to get inside. He stepped closer. The buyer is purchasing the entire property. No. I shook my head. The buyer believes they're purchasing the entire property. Silence. Grant's jaw tightened. You've been talking to lawyers. I've been reading my own paperwork. You'll lose. I've already found the original power of attorney. His eyes narrowed. I also found every property survey. His breathing slowed. And the separate deed. Rachel turned toward him. You told me everything belonged together. It does. It doesn't. It practically does. No, Grant. I spoke before Rachel could. Practically and legally are two different words. He stared at me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Real uncertainty. You can't stop the sale. I don't have to. What? You did that yourself. He frowned. The development company believes they're buying one parcel. They are. They aren't. I held up another document. They're buying a lawsuit. Rachel looked horrified. You never checked. Grant ignored her. Instead, he pointed toward the room behind me. What else is in there? My property. I want to see it. No. You don't have a choice. I do. I smiled calmly. You are standing outside my property. Grant looked ready to push past me. Before he could move, Denise stepped into the doorway. Her briefcase rested against one leg. Mr. Carter. He froze. Who are you? Denise Walker. She handed him a business card. My client's attorney, Rachel whispered. Attorney. Grant's confidence vanished almost instantly. Denise continued in the same calm voice she used in courtrooms. From this moment forward, all communication regarding Mrs. Freeman's property should come through my office. Grant crumpled the business card slightly. You think a lawyer changes anything? No. She smiled politely. The law does. He turned toward Rachel. We're leaving. Rachel didn't move. She continued staring at the deed still in my hands. You knew there was another parcel. Grant avoided the question. Come on. You knew? He finally looked at her. It doesn't matter now. Those 6 words told Rachel everything she needed to know. Not only had he failed to investigate the property properly, he had hidden that failure from her. As Grant walked away, Rachel remained where she was. For the first time since she changed the locks on my front door, I saw something replacing certainty. Doubt. Not about me. About the man she had trusted more than her own mother. When she finally looked back at me, her voice was barely above a whisper. What else hasn't he told me? I didn't answer, because the truth was already beginning to reveal itself. And I suspected Rachel had only just taken the first step toward discovering that she had never been Grant's partner in this plan. She had been his insurance policy. The morning after my meeting with Rachel, Denise arrived at the motel carrying 2 large banker's boxes and an expression I had learned to recognize over the years. She looked like she had found something important. I hope you've had coffee, she said. I've had 2 cups. You may need a third. We spread documents across the small motel table until there was barely room left for our mugs. Denise pointed to a legal calendar. The closing is scheduled for tomorrow at 11. I know. Which means today is our last opportunity to change the direction of this case before money changes hands. She handed me a draft of an emergency filing. At the top were the words, Motion for Temporary Injunction. What exactly does this do? I asked. If the judge grants it, the sale stops. And if the judge doesn't, then we continue fighting. She paused. But we'd rather prevent the damage than repair it. That sounded like something Samuel would have said. I signed every page Denise indicated. Within an hour, she was walking into the courthouse while I remained in the motel organizing evidence. By noon, my phone rang. The motion has been filed, Denise said. The hearing, tomorrow morning. The same day as closing. Exactly. I understood her strategy immediately. If the judge issued even a temporary order, the title company would have to pause everything. But Denise wasn't finished. I also sent formal notice to the development company. What kind of notice? That Unit B is separately owned and not included in any authorized sale. For the first time, the buyer would hear the truth directly from me instead of Grant. How do you think they'll react? They'll ask questions. And Grant hates questions, she laughed softly, especially legal ones. That afternoon, another surprise arrived. Martin Ellis called. I've reviewed additional financing records. What did you find? The bridge loan wasn't Grant's only problem. He explained that several months earlier, Grant had pledged future proceeds from the property sale to secure short-term business financing. If the sale collapses, he defaults, almost immediately. How much? Martin hesitated. I can't tell you the exact amount. But it's enough that losing this transaction would create serious financial consequences. Everything suddenly made sense. Grant hadn't simply wanted my house, he needed it. Without the sale, his debts would begin catching up with him. By late afternoon, Denise returned with another document. This came from discovery requests involving Grant's company. She placed several bank statements in front of me. I studied them carefully. Then one transfer caught my eye. Business account ending 4821. Scheduled transfer upon closing. Beneficiary G. Carter Holdings. What is G. Carter Holdings? Grant's company. And Rachel. Denise flipped another page. There she was. One small scheduled transfer. Compared to Grant's amount, it looked almost insignificant. My stomach tightened. He never intended to split the money. No. He intended to keep almost all of it. Denise nodded. It appears that way. I thought about Rachel standing outside the garden room asking what Grant had hidden from her. She believed she was inheriting security. Instead, she was becoming the legal face of a fraudulent transaction, while Grant quietly prepared to receive nearly everything. Then my phone vibrated. A text message. Noah. Can I call? I answered immediately. His voice sounded nervous. Grandma? I'm here. Dad's gone. Are you safe? Yeah. He lowered his voice. I took pictures. Of what? The notebook. Did anyone see you? No. He sent several images while we remained on the phone. I opened the first. Grant's handwriting filled every page. Closing expenses, loan payoff, construction debt, consulting fees. Then another page. Distribution plan. My eyes stopped on the final lines. Grant Carter, 87%. Rachel Carter, 8%. Miscellaneous, 5%. There it was. Rachel wasn't receiving half. She wasn't even receiving 10%. Noah spoke quietly. I don't think Mom knows. I don't think she does either. There are more pages. I opened another photograph. This one contained a handwritten checklist. Close sale, pay lender, transfer funds, leave Friday, Florida. My pulse quickened. Leave Friday. Friday was only 2 days away. There were no airline reservations listed for Rachel. None for Noah. Only one passenger name. Grant Carter. I looked toward Denise. She had already seen the screen. He planned to leave. Without them. Noah interrupted our silence. Grandma? Yes. I heard him say he needed Mom's signature because of the deed. My heart sank. He said if anything goes wrong. Noah swallowed. It's her problem. Denise quietly wrote those words down. They're important. After hanging up, neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, I said, I need Rachel to see this. Denise surprised me by shaking her head. Not yet. Why? Because right now Grant still believes he controls the situation. If Rachel learns, she'll confront him. Wouldn't that help us? Not necessarily. Denise leaned forward. If Grant realizes we know about his financial plan, he'll start destroying evidence. She was right. Again. We wait until tomorrow. At closing. At closing. For the first time, I understood Denise's full strategy. She wasn't trying merely to stop the sale. She wanted Grant to keep talking, keep lying, keep assuring everyone the transaction was legitimate. Every additional false statement made the eventual consequences more severe. That evening, I returned to the garden room alone. I wanted one quiet hour before everything changed. The room felt different now. Not because anything had moved, because I finally understood what it represented. I sat in Samuel's old chair. Outside, I could hear birds settling into the maple trees. Inside, everything remained exactly where he had left it. My fingers rested on the worn wooden armrest. You always told me to keep records. For a moment, I imagined hearing his answer. Not because I believed in ghosts, because after 40 years of marriage, I still knew exactly what he would have said. Facts matter. Truth lasts longer than lies. I smiled through tears. Then a loud crack echoed outside. Someone was forcing something. I stood as quickly as my knee allowed. The sound came again. Wood splintering. I quietly walked toward the side window. There, less than 20 feet away, stood Grant. He wasn't at the main house. He was beside the exterior wall of the garden room, holding a pry bar. My heart pounded. He looked around to make sure no neighbors were watching. Then he wedged the metal bar beneath one of the old window frames. He pulled. The wood groaned. Another hard pull. The frame shifted slightly. He wasn't trying to open the main door anymore. I was trying to break into the one room he suddenly realized he didn't control. I immediately stepped back and called Denise. He knows. What? He's trying to force his way into the garden room. Call the police. I already am. Within minutes, flashing blue lights illuminated the alley. Grant stepped away from the window just as two officers approached. What seems to be the problem? One officer asked. Grant forced a smile. This is my property. I unlocked the garden room door and stepped outside holding the original deed. No. I handed the document to the officer. This property belongs to me. The officer carefully compared the parcel number with the address. Grant's confident expression disappeared. Again. The officer turned toward him. Sir, do you have documentation showing ownership of this parcel? Grant said nothing. Not one word. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, he couldn't invent an answer quickly enough. And tomorrow morning, with the court hearing only hours away, I intended to make sure everyone else discovered exactly why. I barely slept the night before the hearing. Not because I was afraid, because after weeks of being treated like a confused old woman, I finally had the opportunity to let the truth speak for itself. At 8 o'clock the next morning, Denise and I walked into the Richmond County Courthouse carrying 3 organized binders. Every document was tabbed, every photograph labeled, every recording backed up twice. Samuel had always believed preparation defeated panic. That morning I understood exactly what he meant. The emergency hearing lasted less than 30 minutes. Grant arrived with a private attorney I had never seen before. Rachel followed several steps behind him. She looked pale. She never once met my eyes. The judge reviewed Denise's motion carefully. Then Denise stood. Your Honor, we are not asking the court to determine final ownership today. She spoke calmly, never raising her voice. We are requesting a temporary injunction to prevent irreversible harm while serious allegations of forgery, elder financial exploitation, and fraudulent transfer are investigated. She submitted the certified copy of the limited power of attorney, then my hospital records, then the recorded deed, finally the scanned copy with its digital timestamp. Grant's attorney argued that I had voluntarily transferred my property. Denise responded by reading one paragraph directly from the power of attorney. The agent shall not transfer, gift, assign, or otherwise convey any interest in the principal's real property to herself. Silence filled the courtroom. The judge read the paragraph twice. Then he looked toward Grant's attorney. Counsel. The attorney hesitated. We believe additional facts. I'm asking a very specific question. The judge tapped the document. Does this language authorize the transfer reflected in the recorded deed? The attorney remained silent. That silence answered everything. 10 minutes later, the judge signed a temporary injunction. No sale, no transfer, no closing. Nothing involving Unit A could proceed until further order of the court. When we walked out of the courtroom, Denise smiled. The title company will already know. How? I sent them notice before the hearing began. Instead of celebrating, we drove directly to the title company's office. The closing meeting had already started. When Denise opened the conference room door, every conversation stopped. Around the polished table sat Grant, Rachel, 2 representatives from the development company, a title officer, a real estate broker, and a loan representative connected by video call. Grant stood immediately. You can't just walk in here. Denise calmly placed the signed injunction on the table. We already have. The title officer picked up the order first. Within seconds, his expression changed. What is this? A temporary injunction issued this morning. The room became perfectly quiet. Grant looked furious. This is ridiculous. The title officer ignored him. Instead, he read every page carefully. Then he looked toward the development company's attorney. I think we need to stop. Grant slammed his hand against the table. No. The attorney answered before anyone else could. We don't have a choice, Grant pointed at me. She's lying. I finally spoke. No. I placed the certified deed for Unit B beside the injunction. You've been trying to sell property you never owned. The development company's representative frowned. What property? I slid the survey across the table. The garden room. He compared the survey with his own contract, then looked confused. Our purchase agreement describes the entire structure. Incorrectly, Denise stepped forward. The contract represents one parcel. She tapped the legal description. The property actually consists of two separate parcels. The title officer immediately began searching through his computer records. After nearly a minute, he looked up. Oh. What? He turned the monitor toward everyone. There they were. Parcel 18441A, Parcel 18441B, separate, distinct, recorded years apart. The development company's attorney slowly removed his glasses. Mr. Carter, Grant remained silent. Did you disclose this? It's attached to the house. That wasn't my question. It functions as one building. That wasn't my question either. The attorney leaned forward. Did you disclose that you did not own the entire structure you contracted to sell? Grant finally answered. No. The room became even quieter. Rachel stared at him. You knew. He avoided looking at her. It wasn't important. The attorney interrupted sharply. It is extraordinarily important. The title officer spoke next. We cannot insure this transaction. The loan representative on the video screen joined the discussion. If title cannot be insured, funding cannot be released. One sentence. Millions of dollars disappeared with it. Grant suddenly changed tactics. This is only a misunderstanding. No. Denise opened another folder. Now we'd like to discuss something else. She connected a small speaker to her phone. Grant immediately recognized it. What are you doing? Playing his own voice. The recording from the garden room filled the conference room. The buyers won't care. She'll already be in assisted living. The important thing is getting paid before anyone starts asking complicated questions. No one spoke while the recording played. When it ended, the silence felt heavier than before. The development company's attorney slowly turned toward Grant. Did you tell us Mrs. Freeman lacked the mental capacity to object? Grant didn't answer. Denise placed another document onto the table. The false assisted living application. Then another. The forged physician certification. Rachel's eyes widened. I never saw that. You signed it, Denise replied quietly. I signed the admission form. Not the medical certification. Rachel picked up the pages. I thought. Her voice disappeared. Grant finally spoke. It doesn't matter. Rachel looked at him. You said the doctor completed this. Grant said nothing. The title officer stood. This meeting is over. No. Grant reached for the contract. We're finishing today. The development company's attorney firmly placed a hand on the paperwork. No, we're not. Then he looked directly at me. Mrs. Freeman. I'm listening. I sincerely apologize. I nodded politely. You relied on information provided to you. We clearly relied on incorrect information. Grant suddenly pointed toward Rachel. This was her deal. Every head turned. What? Grant continued. The property was in Rachel's name. Rachel stared at him in disbelief. What are you saying? You signed everything. You told me to. You still signed it. The room froze. For weeks he had presented them as equal partners. Now, with everything collapsing, he was pushing every ounce of responsibility onto her. Rachel's face lost all color. You said we were doing this together. We were. Then why are you blaming me? Grant didn't answer. He couldn't. Because everyone in the room had already begun understanding the truth. He had intentionally kept the property in Rachel's name. She would become the face of the fraudulent transfer. She would answer the legal questions. She would bear the risk, while he quietly collected almost all of the money. Denise calmly removed one final document from her briefcase. The notebook photographs Noah had taken. Distribution plan. 87%. 8%. Grant's expression changed immediately. Where did you get that? I believe that's irrelevant. Rachel grabbed the pages. She read them once. Then again. Her hands started shaking. Florida. Grant remained silent. You were leaving. Still nothing. You weren't taking me. Silence. You weren't taking Noah. No answer. Rachel slowly lowered the papers. Everything she had believed for months collapsed in less than 60 seconds. The house, the inheritance, the future, the marriage. Every promise Grant had made rested on lies. I looked at my daughter. Not with satisfaction, not with triumph, only sadness. Because in that single moment, she finally understood something I had realized much earlier. Grant had never been fighting for our family. He had only been fighting for himself, and now that the plan had failed, he was perfectly willing to leave everyone else behind. No one left the title company's conference room immediately. The silence after Grant's deception was louder than any argument could have been. Rachel remained seated, still holding the photocopies of the notebook Noah had secretly photographed. She read the page again. 87%, 8%, Florida, one airline ticket. Every line erased another promise Grant had made to her. Finally, she looked up. When were you going to tell me? Grant rubbed both hands across his face. This isn't the place. No. Her voice trembled, but it was no longer weak. This is exactly the place. The representatives from the development company quietly gathered their folders, sensing the meeting had become something very different from a real estate closing. The title officer excused himself to make several phone calls. Within minutes, only the family remained in the conference room, along with Denise. Grant stood. We're leaving. Rachel didn't move. You told me we'd finally have security. We still can. You told me we'd own the house. We would have. You told me this was for Noah. Grant's jaw tightened. It was. She held up the notebook. Then why is almost every dollar going to your company? He didn't answer. She asked another question. Why is there only one plane ticket? Still nothing. Her breathing became uneven. Were you planning to leave us? Grant slammed his palm against the table. I was trying to save this family. No. It was the first time I interrupted him in several minutes. You were trying to save yourself. His eyes turned toward me. You don't know anything about business. No. I stood slowly, leaning on my cane. But I know what betrayal looks like. Rachel turned toward me. Tears streamed down her face. Mom. I held up my hand. Not yet. She lowered her eyes. Grant tried one last time. Rachel, don't listen to her. Rachel laughed bitterly. For months, that's exactly what I've been doing. Her voice broke. And look where it brought me. She gathered the notebook pages and walked out of the conference room without another word. Grant watched her leave but didn't follow. Instead, he looked at Denise. What happens now? She answered calmly. Now the investigation continues. He shook his head. You can't prove criminal intent. We'll let the evidence speak. The meeting ended. Outside reporters had not yet arrived. Neither had police investigators. For a few brief hours, everything remained strangely quiet. That peace lasted until the following morning. Denise and I were reviewing documents in her office when Rachel called. Her voice sounded different. Not frightened, defeated. Can I come? Denise looked at me. I nodded. Yes. Rachel arrived carrying 2 cardboard boxes. She placed them on Denise's conference table without saying a word. What are these? I asked. My laptop. Another box. My phone. Another. Grant's external hard drives. Denise looked surprised. How did you get those? Rachel gave a tired smile. He left early. And I packed before he realized what I was doing. She sat down heavily. I confronted him after the meeting. No one interrupted. He admitted everything. My heart tightened. What exactly? Rachel stared at the floor. He said he couldn't qualify for financing because of lawsuits involving his construction business. Denise quietly took notes. So he needed someone else's name. Rachel nodded. Mine. She laughed without humor. I thought I was becoming a homeowner. Instead, I became his shield. She explained everything. Grant had convinced her that placing the property in her name would protect the family. He claimed lenders trusted women with cleaner financial histories. He insisted everything would eventually belong to both of them. Every explanation sounded reasonable when viewed separately. Together they formed a trap. He already had another bank account, Rachel whispered. I found the statements. She handed them to Denise. There were transfers I never knew existed. Then she looked at me. I'm sorry. I remained silent. She continued anyway. I knew you never wanted to give me the house. Those words hurt more than everything else she had confessed. I kept telling myself, she struggled to continue, that it was just an early inheritance. You knew. I knew. You knew I hadn't willingly signed that deed. She closed her eyes. I knew. There it was, the admission I had expected since the day she locked me outside. Not confusion, not misunderstanding, choice. She had chosen, not because she hated me, because she convinced herself that wanting something badly enough made taking it acceptable. I can't blame Grant for that. Rachel wiped away fresh tears. I can blame him for lying. She looked directly at me. But I chose to believe him. For the first time, I saw genuine accountability, not excuses, responsibility. Denise finally spoke. If you're willing to cooperate fully, that matters. Rachel nodded immediately. I will. That includes providing passwords, emails, financial records, and testimony. I understand. And understanding that cooperation doesn't erase what you've done. I know. Silence returned. Then another knock echoed through Denise's office. Noah. He stepped inside carrying his backpack. The moment he saw me, he rushed forward and hugged me carefully. I'm sorry. I kissed the top of his head. You've done nothing wrong. Rachel began crying again. I dragged him into this. No, Noah said quietly. Dad did. He reached into his backpack. I found something else. Another notebook, smaller, older. Grant's handwriting covered every page. Expense records, phone numbers, meeting notes. Denise turned several pages, then stopped. This. She pointed toward one dated entry. Meeting with notary. Need Rachel to sign before Alice returns. Another page. Doctor form completed. Find someone willing to sign. Denise carefully closed the notebook. This is significant. Grant had written his own roadmap. Rachel stared at the pages. I never saw that. No. Denise looked toward me. I don't think he intended anyone to. Before we could continue, Rachel's phone began ringing. Grant. She stared at the screen. He keeps calling. Answer. She looked surprised. Really? Put it on speaker. She answered. Grant's voice exploded through the room. Where are you? Rachel remained calm. With my mother. What are you doing? Talking. You need to come home. I don't think so. You took my files. Our files. My files. Rachel looked at me before answering. No, Grant. They were evidence. He fell silent. Then his voice became colder than I had ever heard it. If you hand those over. I already have. Another long silence. Finally, he said, You'll regret this. Rachel ended the call. Her hands trembled. Noah quietly moved beside her. Without thinking, she wrapped one arm around him. For the first time in weeks, I saw my daughter acting like a mother instead of someone chasing a house. That afternoon, police investigators arrived to collect copies of the records Denise had organized. As they left, one detective paused beside me. Mrs. Freeman. Yes. You've kept remarkably thorough records. I smiled faintly. My husband used to tease me about that. The detective smiled back. It may have saved your case. After everyone else left, only Rachel, Noah, Denise, and I remained. Rachel stood. I'll leave now. She hesitated. I don't expect forgiveness. I looked at her for a long moment. You shouldn't. Fresh tears filled her eyes. I only hope. She couldn't finish. I finally answered. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. She nodded. I know. I may someday forgive you. She waited. But you will have to earn every piece of trust you threw away. Rachel lowered her head. I will try. She left with Noah. I watched them walk toward the parking lot together. For the first time since all of this began, they weren't following Grant. They were walking away from him. The legal battle was far from over. The investigation had only begun. But something far more important had finally happened. The lies that held my family together had collapsed. Now every one of us would have to decide whether the truth, painful as it was, could become the foundation for whatever came next. 3 months later, I walked back into the Richmond County Courthouse. This time, I wasn't using a motel room as my temporary address. I wasn't carrying cardboard boxes filled with the pieces of my life. I wasn't wondering whether anyone would believe me. I carried only one leather folder. Everything else was already part of the court record. The hearing that morning was not about temporary orders. It was about the truth. Grant sat at the defense table wearing a navy suit that looked more expensive than anything I had ever seen him own while living under my roof. He avoided looking in my direction. Rachel sat several rows behind him beside Noah. She had been subpoenaed to testify. She looked terrified. I understood why. Telling the truth would not erase what she had done. It would simply end the lies. Judge Harold Whitman entered precisely at 9 o'clock. After several preliminary matters, Denise stood for opening statements. "This case," she began, "is not merely about a forged deed." She paused. "It is about the systematic exploitation of an elderly widow through deception, manipulation, and fabricated legal documents." She walked slowly toward the evidence table. Over the course of several months, the defendants attempted to obtain Mrs. Alice Freeman's home by exceeding the authority of a limited power of attorney, filing a fraudulent deed falsely portraying her as mentally incompetent, and preparing to sell property they did not legally own. Every word echoed through the courtroom. Grant's attorney argued that mistakes had been made, but insisted there had been no criminal intent. Denise answered that argument with documents, not opinions, not emotions, documents. The limited power of attorney. The scanned digital copy with the original metadata. Hospital records proving I was in recovery when the deed was recorded. The certified survey showing Unit B had never belonged to Unit A. The audio recording captured from the garden room. The notebook describing Grant's financial distribution plan. One by one, each exhibit found its place before the court. Then Denise called her first witness. The notary. A middle-aged woman named Linda Brooks walked to the witness stand looking visibly uncomfortable. After taking the oath, Denise asked a single question. "Did you personally witness Mrs. Alice Freeman sign the quitclaim deed recorded on April 17th? The woman looked toward Grant, then back at the judge. "No." The courtroom became perfectly silent. Denise continued. "Did you ever meet Mrs. Freeman on April 17th? "No." "Did you notarize the deed?" "I notarized a document presented to me." "Presented by whom?" She hesitated. "Mr. Grant Carter." Grant's attorney immediately objected. The judge overruled him. Linda continued. "Mr. Carter told me the signature had already been completed because Mrs. Freeman was recovering from surgery." "Did you verify her identity?" "No." "Did you witness her sign?" "No." "Did you speak to her?" "No." The damage was immediate. The deed's credibility collapsed in front of everyone watching. Next came the forensic document examiner. He projected enlarged copies of my genuine signatures beside the forged deed. Even someone with no training could now see the differences. Pressure points, pen lifts, letter spacing, natural hesitation where genuine signatures flowed smoothly. In my professional opinion, he testified, the questioned signature was not written by Mrs. Freeman. Grant stared straight ahead. He no longer looked confident. He looked tired. The next witness surprised everyone. Mrs. Daniels, the hospital administrative employee. She clearly remembered our meeting before surgery. "I specifically reviewed the limitations contained within the power of attorney." Denise asked. "Did Mrs. Freeman appear confused?" "No." "Did she understand the document?" "Completely." "Did she ask questions?" "Several." Mrs. Daniels smiled slightly. "She actually corrected one formatting error before signing." A few people in the courtroom laughed quietly. The judge smiled as well. That single detail destroyed the claim that I had been mentally incapable of understanding legal paperwork. Then Denise introduced the assisted living application. The physician whose name appeared on the certification testified remotely. I never examined Mrs. Freeman. Were these your signatures? They were not. Did you authorize anyone else to complete this form? No. The courtroom became quieter with every witness. Each lie uncovered another. Then came Rachel. She walked slowly to the witness stand. Noah watched silently from the gallery. After taking the oath, she kept both hands folded tightly together. Denise spoke gently. Mrs. Carter, did your mother voluntarily give you her home? Rachel closed her eyes. No. Did you know that? Yes. Why did you proceed? Tears rolled down her face. I convinced myself it would become mine eventually anyway. Did Mr. Carter encourage that belief? Yes. But no one forced you to sign documents. No. No one forced you to change the locks. No. No one forced you to prevent your mother from entering her own home. Rachel began crying openly. No. The honesty hurt. I could see it. Every admission cost her another piece of pride. But she never tried to excuse herself. I was wrong, she whispered. I knew she hadn't chosen to give me the house. Grant finally looked toward her. The expression on his face wasn't sadness, it was anger. She continued anyway. I wanted to believe I deserved it. The courtroom remained silent until Denise asked one final question. Why are you telling the truth today? Rachel looked directly at me. Because my mother deserved honesty before she deserved another apology. I lowered my eyes. There was nothing I could say. Then Grant took the stand. Against his attorney's advice. He denied nearly everything. He claimed he believed the power of attorney allowed the transfer. He insisted he thought Unit B belonged to the main residence. He denied planning to leave Rachel. Then Denise stood for cross-examination. She approached carrying only one small notebook, Grant's own. You testified you believed the garden room belonged to Unit A. Yes. She opened the notebook. Please read the highlighted entry dated October 14th. Grant hesitated. The judge instructed him to answer. Slowly he read aloud. Asked Alice whether garden room had separate ownership. She avoided answering. Denise waited. You asked whether it had separate ownership. No response. But you suspected it. I was curious. She turned another page. Read the next highlighted sentence. Need to verify whether garden room affects demolition. Grant stopped reading. The courtroom remained silent. You were concerned enough to write it down. No answer. Then Denise produced my handwritten journal. My client documented the same conversations independently. Grant stared at the pages. For the first time since the trial began, he looked defeated. Finally, Denise displayed Noah's photographs of the financial notebook. One final question. She pointed toward the distribution plan. Were you planning to receive 87% of the sale proceeds? Grant remained silent. Were you planning to leave for Florida immediately after closing? Silence. Were Rachel and Noah included on that reservation? No answer. Judge Whitman looked directly at him. Mr. Carter, you are under oath. Grant slowly lowered his head. No. The word barely rose above a whisper, but everyone heard it. By late afternoon, the judge delivered his ruling. The quitclaim deed was declared void. Ownership of Unit A immediately reverted to me. The temporary injunction became permanent until all remaining claims were resolved. The court referred evidence of forgery, fraudulent notarization, financial exploitation of an elderly adult, and document falsification to the Commonwealth's attorney for further investigation. Grant would face those consequences separately. Rachel did not escape responsibility. The judge acknowledged her cooperation, but emphasized that voluntary testimony did not erase her actions. She would remain financially responsible for returning every dollar improperly taken from my accounts and continue cooperating with investigators. Just as the judge reminded everyone required accountability from every person involved. When the hearing ended, reporters gathered outside. I ignored every microphone. I had not fought to become a headline. I had fought to come home. As I walked down the courthouse steps, Rachel quietly approached me. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. I'm sorry. I studied her for a long moment. I believe you are. Hope flickered across her face. Then I continued. But believing you're sorry isn't the same as trusting you again. She nodded slowly. I understand. No. I looked toward the courthouse behind us. I think today, you finally do. We walked away in different directions, not because I hated my daughter, because healing cannot begin until justice has been allowed to finish speaking. The first morning, I unlocked my own front door again. I stood on the porch for almost a full minute before turning the key. Not because I was afraid someone would stop me, because I wanted to remember the difference between entering my house by right and begging to enter it by permission. The lock clicked. This time it welcomed me. I stepped inside slowly. The familiar scent of cedar floors and old brick should have made me feel at peace. Instead, I felt as though I had walked into a stranger's home. The living room was spotless. Too spotless. Samuel's recliner was still missing. The quilts my mother had sewn were gone. The family photographs had been replaced with empty nail holes in the wall. Someone had carefully removed the story of our family. Only the structure remained. I rested one hand against the hallway wall. "This is still home," I whispered, "but it doesn't know me anymore." Denise walked in behind me carrying a small notebook. "You don't have to do everything today." "I know." "Then start with one room." I nodded. The bedroom. When I opened the door, I stopped breathing. My bed remained exactly where it had always been, but the nightstands had disappeared. Samuel's reading lamp was gone. His favorite blanket had been folded into a cardboard box marked storage. I walked toward the closet. Half my clothes were missing. Everything had been packed as though my life had already ended. I sat quietly on the edge of the bed. For weeks I had imagined coming home would feel like winning. Instead, it felt like returning after a flood. The house still stood, but something precious had been washed away. Denise gently placed one hand on my shoulder. "They changed the rooms." "They tried to," she smiled softly. "You'll change them back." That afternoon, I hired a locksmith. When he arrived, he recognized me immediately. "I heard what happened." "So did everyone else." He nodded awkwardly. "I'm glad you're home." As he removed every lock Grant had installed, I watched each one fall into a cardboard box, metal against metal, one after another. Every lock represented another attempt to erase me. When he finished, he handed me a small ring holding brand new keys. "Only you decide who gets these." I held them carefully. Such a simple object. Yet they carried a lesson I should have learned much earlier. Love never requires surrendering your boundaries. A week later, Rachel called. "I found an apartment." "I'm glad." "It's small. You only need enough space to begin again." She hesitated. "I wanted you to know before someone else told you." "I appreciate that." She waited. "Can Noah visit?" "Of course." "And me?" I looked toward the garden room through the kitchen window. "Not the house." Silence. Then she quietly answered, "I understand." "The garden room. I'll come there." Our first meeting happened 3 days later. Rachel arrived carrying nothing except a notebook. No flowers. No gifts. No dramatic speeches. She simply sat across from me at Samuel's old desk. For several minutes we talked about ordinary things. Her new apartment, Noah's school, my physical therapy. Eventually she opened the notebook. "I've started counseling." "I'm glad." My therapist asked me to write every decision I made. She slid the notebook toward me. "I wanted to show you." I didn't read it. Not because I wasn't curious. Because trust cannot be rebuilt by inspecting homework. You don't need to prove you're attending. "I know. I need to see it in how you live." She nodded. "I expected that." She also told me she had found full-time work with a non-profit organization that helped families locate affordable housing. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Someone who once tried to take a home was now helping other people find one. "I don't know whether I'll stay there forever," she admitted. "But I need to spend some time doing something that helps instead of takes." For the first time in months, I saw a glimpse of the daughter I used to know. Not because she cried, not because she apologized, because she had stopped asking what she deserved. Instead, she asked what she could repair. That was a different word entirely. Noah visited every Saturday afternoon. Sometimes we baked cookies, sometimes we worked in the garden, sometimes we simply sat together in the garden room while he finished homework. One afternoon he asked a question that surprised me. Grandma, yes. Are you ever going to trust Mom again? Children have a way of asking impossible questions with complete sincerity. I thought carefully before answering. I already trust her with some things. You do? I trust that she's trying. He smiled. But I don't yet trust that trying is enough. He nodded thoughtfully. I think she knows. I think she does too. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. The criminal investigation against Grant continued. His business collapsed after creditors withdrew financing. Several former clients also came forward claiming similar deception involving construction contracts. I took no pleasure in hearing that news. Justice isn't satisfying because someone suffers. It's satisfying because the truth finally reaches everyone. Rachel continued cooperating with investigators. She also made monthly payments toward reimbursing the money improperly withdrawn from my accounts. The amounts weren't large. That wasn't the point. Every payment represented responsibility, not obligation, responsibility. One evening, Denise visited for dinner. Afterward, we sat in the garden room drinking tea. You've changed this room. I looked around. Samuel's desk remained. So did the bookshelves, but I had added fresh paint, new curtains, and comfortable chairs. It finally feels alive again. It does, she smiled. You know. What? This room saved your case. I looked toward the old fireproof cabinet. No. She looked surprised. It preserved the evidence. But what saved my case? I rested my hand on Samuel's notebook. Was every ordinary habit we practiced for decades. Keeping records, making copies, reading before signing, asking questions. Those quiet habits had become stronger than every lie Grant created. The following weekend, Rachel arrived early. She stood outside the garden room door waiting patiently until I opened it. She no longer reached for the handle herself. That small gesture mattered more than she probably realized. Respect begins with little things. Before leaving that afternoon, she stopped at the doorway. I almost forgot. She reached into her bag. Not a gift, not jewelry, not flowers. Samuel's reading lamp. I found it in storage. She carefully placed it back on his desk. I thought, her voice softened, it belonged here. I looked at the lamp for a long time, then at my daughter. For the first time since she changed the locks, I felt something inside me loosen. Not complete forgiveness, not yet, but the first quiet movement toward it. Healing, I realized, rarely arrives through one grand moment. It comes back one honest choice at a time. One repaired room, one returned lamp, one respected doorway, one difficult conversation, and one boundary that is never surrendered again. 1 year later, I unlocked my front door on a bright Saturday morning and smiled for a reason that had nothing to do with the house itself. For the first time in a very long time, it truly felt like home again. Not because everything had returned to the way it had been. It hadn't. Some things never do. The hallway now held different photographs. New memories stood beside old ones. Samuel's favorite chair had been restored and placed back beside the fireplace. The kitchen curtains were yellow again. The maple tree outside my bedroom window had grown another season taller. The house had survived. So had I. My knee no longer required a cane except on particularly cold mornings. Physical therapy had ended months earlier, though I still walked through the garden every afternoon because the doctors insisted movement remained the best medicine. I had learned another truth. Healing works the same way. You cannot rush it. You simply keep moving. The greatest change had taken place in the garden room. The old desk where Samuel once balanced household accounts still stood beneath the window, but the room had become something much larger than my private refuge. Above the doorway hung a simple wooden sign Noah had carved himself. The Freeman Room. He had insisted the name belonged there. Grandpa would have liked it, he told me. I believed he would have. Once every month, Denise and I hosted a free community workshop inside the room. We invited retirees, widows, veterans, church members, and anyone else who wanted to learn how to protect themselves from financial exploitation. We talked about powers of attorney, property deeds, estate planning, identity theft, family pressure. We reminded people to read every page before signing, to keep copies, to ask questions, to never confuse love with surrender. At the end of every workshop, I always held up the same small brass key. The audience usually smiled, expecting a sentimental story. Instead, I told them the truth. This key didn't save my home. They looked puzzled. My habits did. Keeping records, making copies, reading documents carefully, respecting facts instead of assumptions. The key only opened the door. Preparation protected everything behind it. Those words always left the room completely silent. One afternoon, after a workshop ended, an elderly gentleman approached me. My son keeps insisting I put everything in his name. He looked embarrassed. I thought refusing would mean I didn't trust him. I smiled gently. Setting healthy boundaries isn't the opposite of love. What is it? It is one of the ways love survives. He nodded slowly. I needed someone to say that. Those conversations became the most meaningful part of my retirement. The garden room that Grant wanted to demolish had become a place where other families learned how to avoid the mistakes mine had made. Rachel often volunteered during the workshops, not because I asked her, because she asked me. She greeted visitors, served coffee, organized folders, never once introducing herself as the victim. Whenever someone asked how she became involved, she answered honestly. I learned these lessons the hard way. There was no self-pity in her voice anymore, only responsibility. She had completed nearly a year of counseling. She still lived in the small apartment with Noah. She continued making monthly restitution payments exactly as ordered. More importantly, she no longer talked about what she deserved. She talked about what she hoped to rebuild. Trust. One decision at a time. Noah flourished. He earned excellent grades and began talking about studying architecture in college. I like old buildings, he told me one evening. They have stories. So do people. He smiled. I know. Grant's story ended very differently. He eventually accepted a plea agreement on several fraud-related charges after investigators uncovered additional financial misconduct unrelated to my case. Other families came forward. Other forged documents surfaced. Other lies collapsed beneath evidence. When the prosecutor informed me of the outcome, I thanked him politely. Then I hung up the phone. I felt no celebration. Justice had already happened long before the sentence. Justice began the day the truth stopped hiding. On one autumn afternoon, Rachel arrived carrying a small wooden box. I found something. She placed it carefully on Samuel's desk. Inside rested the old brass house key that had once fit the original front door. The lock Grant had replaced. The key that had failed the day I came home from the hospital. I found it in one of my boxes. She held it gently. I couldn't throw it away. Neither could I. She looked toward the garden room window where sunlight poured across the floor. I've been thinking. About what? This room. What about it? It didn't save you because I couldn't get inside. She smiled sadly. It saved you because you never stopped protecting what mattered before anyone threatened to take it. I looked at my daughter. For the first time in over a year, I saw peace in her eyes. Not happiness. Peace. There is a difference. Peace grows slowly. It asks for honesty. It refuses shortcuts. That evening, Noah joined us for dinner. Afterward, the three of us walked through the garden Samuel had loved so much. As the sun began to set, Rachel stopped beside the back gate. I want to ask you something. I waited. She looked nervous. May I have a key? The question hung quietly between us. A year earlier, I would have heard only fear. Now I heard something else. Hope. I reached into my pocket. Rachel watched every movement. Slowly, I placed a single key into her hand. Not the front door key, not the garden room key, the small key to the garden gate. She looked down at it, then back at me. You noticed? I did. You trust me with this. I trust you with the first step. Tears filled her eyes. The front door. Not yet. She nodded immediately. I understand. I believe you do. She closed her fingers around the little key as though it were something priceless. Perhaps it was. Because trust is never rebuilt with one dramatic gesture. It is rebuilt exactly the way it is lost. One choice, one promise, one door at a time. As Rachel and Noah walked toward the garden gate together, I remained standing outside the garden room. The evening sunlight poured through its windows just as it had for decades. I rested my hand against the weathered wooden frame. The room my daughter could never enter had once represented protection. Now it represented something even greater. Wisdom earned through pain, compassion strengthened by boundaries, and the quiet certainty that surviving betrayal does not require becoming bitter. It only requires refusing to surrender your truth. Ketuk Fan 15, Life Lesson. If this experience taught me anything, it is that love and trust are not the same thing. Many parents spend their entire lives believing that loving their children means saying yes, avoiding difficult conversations, or sacrificing everything without question. I used to believe that too. I thought setting boundaries would make me seem selfish. Instead, I learned that healthy boundaries protect relationships rather than destroy them. Another lesson is that important documents are never just paperwork. Read every page, keep copies, ask questions even when someone you love says, just sign it. The people who truly care about you will never be offended because you choose to understand what you're signing. I also learned that forgiveness is not the same as pretending nothing happened. I forgave my daughter because carrying bitterness would only have continued hurting me. But forgiveness did not erase consequences. Trust returns slowly because trust is built through consistent actions over time, not emotional promises made in a single afternoon. Most importantly, I discovered that justice does not always come through revenge. Sometimes justice is simply refusing to give away your voice. Sometimes it is standing calmly with the truth while lies collapse under their own weight. And sometimes it is taking the place where you experienced your deepest pain and turning it into a place where others can find protection, wisdom, and hope. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you for sharing this journey with me. Now I'd love to hear from you. If your own child changed every lock on your house, could you ever forgive them? And do you think Rachel deserved the second chance she received, or would you have made a different choice? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I read as many as I can because every story teaches us something. And before you go, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel, and knowing we're not alone, no matter where we call home. The hardest betrayal is rarely committed by a stranger. It comes from someone whose voice once brought you comfort, whose laughter filled your home, and whose happiness mattered more to you than your own. That is why family wounds cut so deeply. But this story reminds us that love should never require us to surrender our dignity, our wisdom, or our right to protect ourselves. Growing older does not mean becoming powerless. Your kindness is not a weakness, your trust is not an invitation to be taken advantage of, and your lifetime of hard work should never become someone else's entitlement. Setting boundaries is not an act of selfishness, it is an act of self-respect. The people who truly love you will understand those boundaries even if they don't always like them. This journey also teaches us something equally important about forgiveness. Forgiveness is not forgetting what happened or pretending the pain never existed. It is choosing not to let bitterness become the final chapter of your life. At the same time, forgiveness does not erase accountability. Real healing begins only when truth is spoken, responsibility is accepted, and trust is rebuilt through consistent actions over time. Some doors may open again, but they should open with wisdom, not with blind trust. Perhaps the greatest lesson of all is that your darkest season can become someone else's source of hope. Alice could have locked the garden room forever, preserving it only as a reminder of betrayal. Instead, she transformed it into a place where other families could learn, where older adults could protect themselves, and where painful experience became a gift to others. That is one of the most beautiful forms of courage, to allow suffering to shape compassion instead of resentment. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Rachel deserved a second chance after everything she did? Or would you have made a different decision? Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you loved, and what helped you move forward? Please share your story or your opinion in the comments. Your words may encourage someone who is quietly facing a similar struggle today. And if you enjoy heartfelt family stories filled with emotion, justice, and hope, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you remember this. Never let anyone convince you that protecting your dignity means you love your family any less. Sometimes the strongest act of love begins with having the courage to say,